My biggest worry throughout the entire COVID thing is when we get through with COVID, and COVID will come to an end at some point, basically what's happened with lockdowns, things like that, it's like a tool in government's arsenals. And how will they use it? So that's a big concern. In terms of what's going on with our own government, my big worry is, we can talk about hypotheticals, but I'm very worried, for instance, now about what this government's doing on the policing bill. So I don't think enough coverage is being given to the policing bill. It's in the House of Lords at the moment, report stage, so very close.
What are your concerns there, in short?
So basically what it is it's putting huge provisions against any sort of protests. Now, I know the way they've sort of pitched it is, oh, this is something to contain, insulate Britain, left-wing protest groups, but it would apply to everyone, obviously. So let's take an example. Let's say there was another lockdown, Neil, and you went to a protest to voice your views. And even if you didn't actually speak at the protest, let's say, but you just by going, there are provisions in the bill where you could go to prison. You could have there's a new type of ASBO that's being slapped on you that would last 2 years, and they could pretty much just do whatever they like with your life over those 2 years. And this isn't hypothetical. This is going through the House of Lords. If it goes to the report stage, it's got one more reading. It goes back to the House of Commons. It's royal assent.
Richard, you wear many hats. You're a social commentator. I think it'd be fair to call you that as one of the ways in which you've come to to prominence in recent times. Now, listening to Nick there, and feel free to to comment across the board on vaccinations and the rest.
Well, I think the point you made in your monologue. I mean, a lot of people talk about mandating and legislation and policy and restrictions. It's just evil. It's as simple as that. And I'm kind of tired of this kind of rhetoric from politicians and people in the media who just make out as if it's, it's inevitable, it's going to happen. So we're doing it, and we heard what's happening across Europe now. You mentioned Germany and Austria. This is tyranny. It's fascism. It's wrong. It should not be happening. Where are people's rights, our human rights, our right to choose what we do with our bodies? Who has those powers to say, no, we're taking those rights away from you? They should not have those powers. It should be repealed. Any government that can legislate to give anybody a medical intervention, whether they want it or not, is pure tyrannical and it is evil. And I'll never back down from that. That's exactly what it is. I like to call things as they are, Neil. By the way, it's great being on your show. I'm an absolute huge fan, as you discussed before we went off air. And it's this Welshman with the Scotsman, but that's how I see it. You know, on your monologue tonight, if I was at home watching you as I normally do, I'd be watching you. I'd be cheering, because everything you've said there is exactly, it encapsulates how I feel as an individual. Millions of us feel like that, even those who've had the vaccine. This isn't a question of vaxxed and the unvaxxed. This is a question of morality. What kind of a society do we want to be?
Emily, I see you nodding there, and the evident passion in what Richard is saying there, and this is why I wanted Richard to take part tonight. How do you react, you know, sitting there between Nick and Richard? What's your feeling?
Well, for me, I think the problem is that not enough people feel the way that we do on this. There is a huge amount of indifference. A lot of people take the view that, oh, it's not a big deal to get the vaccine. I've got the vaccine, so, you know, therefore, why not make them mandatory? It's just a jab. Why not do so? And they forget that the rights of the individual must trump those of the collective. Otherwise, we do veer into fascism, as you say, authoritarianism. The government is there to protect individual rights fundamentally. And, you know, people have drawn parallels to history, to authoritarian regimes in the past. And they've highlighted how we are othering people, how we're demonizing people who are unvaccinated, how we're talking about them, as you said in your monologue, in a way as if they're unclean, not worthy of the same rights. It's shocking what's happening in Germany. It's even more shocking what's been happening in Australia. I watched a clip that I think Unheard did, with a woman who was in a camp for 14 days, not allowed out despite repeatedly
collected from her home for doing little more than
collected
having
in a van that had obviously been hired by the government or the local authority, and not allowed out even though you've tested negative repeated times. It's madness. And if people shrug their shoulders and think, well, I got the jab, well, I don't mind isolating, that's not the point.
The dark 11th hour draws on and sees us sold to every evil power we fought against of old. Rebellion, rapine, hate, oppression, wrong and greed are loosened to rule our fate by England's act and deed. The faith in which we stand, the laws we made and guard, our honour, lives and land are given for reward. To murder done by night, to treason taught by day, to folly, sloth and spite, and we are thrust away. The blood our fathers spilt, our love, our toils, our pains, are counted us for guilt and only bind our chains. Before an empire's eyes, the traitor claims his price. What need of further lies? We are the sacrifice. We ask no more than leave to reap where we had sown, through good and ill to cleave to our own flag and throne. Now England's shot and steel beneath that flag must show how loyal hearts should kneel to England's oldest foe. We know the war's prepared on every peaceful home. We know the hell's declared for such as served not Rome. The terror, threats and dread in market, hearth and field. We know when all is said, we perish if we yield. Believe we dare not boast. Believe we do not fear. We stand to pay the cost in all that men hold dear. What answer from the north? One law, one land, one throne. If England drives us forth, we shall not fall alone.
Well, hello, welcome here on another Tuesday evening. Going out live to Scotland. Excuse the length of time that it took us to blend in, let's just say from the start. But we had some technical issues, which is now actually solved. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to bring in David Griffiths, the normal host on a Tuesday evening, going out live from Scotland. But I'm going to sit with David for a short period of time whilst we wait on part of the technical issue actually being resolved, in order that David can actually bring his guest in. So without any further ado, I would like to bring on screen David Griffiths, who is your host, and who I'll be away once David's guest comes along. Hi, David. Good to see you.
Hi,
here.
John. Hello. How are you? Good to see you.
Yeah, technology is good, David, whenever technology works, but whenever technology goes wrong, it goes wrong. Yep. Let's just say.
Yes, you're so right. I'm having difficulties here with the PC also, but I'm going to. Santa hopefully is going to bring me lots of nice, shiny new equipment, which will make it all a thing of the past. So that's my plan anyway, John. So hopefully, fingers crossed.
Yeah, that's good. So, David, I mean, after the stream of last week, whenever that you had said that you were going to be going forward the very next day and talking to some people in Scotland, I mean, I'm not asking you for the content of the meeting, but how did the meeting go, David?
Yeah, I'm happy to share, guys, because I did give it quite a big write-up in advance. This was a meeting which was held by a group of people who call themselves the Majority. And they're like a media outlet in Scotland, privately run and owned. And the idea they have is they have been working all year with pro-UK groups in Scotland to fight nationalism. These are people who now, after the election, we're 6 months or whatever it is, 7 months on now since the election, we still find ourselves in Scotland in the position, in the situation that the nationalists are still in government. They've got their green buddies helping them. So there's a massive groundswell of opinion among what we call the silent majority in Scotland, who want to see something happening and want to be sure that there is some action taking place. So this was the first in a series of meetings that we held, and the type of people who accompanied us at the meeting were representatives of the political sphere in Scotland, so quite a few candidates from back in May, a number of business people also, a number of quite prominent business people, particularly from the west of Scotland, because the meeting was held in Glasgow. And I would say it was a big success. We were there for about 3 hours, and a lot of the time was taken up with really a description of what the Majority guys do and what they're looking for. And really what they're looking for is to highlight instances of nationalist, if you like, skullduggery and hypocrisy. And there are limitless, boundless examples of this. And what we're trying to do from here is to just build a momentum so that more people join us, so we can do some fundraising, so we can get some recruitment done, and we can have a group of people who are all of the same mind, which is that it is essential that the UK is kept together. Now, we all have the same feeling, all of the Majority guys, all the All for Unity guys as was, and that's, if you remember, the name of the party for which several of us stood in May. We're all of the same opinion, which is that nationalism is evil. It is a slippery slope to the breakup of the United Kingdom. We are firmly as one against the SNP. We are increasingly frustrated with the traditional opposition parties, the traditional pro-UK opposition parties in Scotland, who seem wholly unable to land any blows, any meaningful blows at all on the nationalist and green, if you like, coalition. So the purpose of the meeting was to say, okay, who are we? Right, let's introduce ourselves. What do we want to do? We're all of the same mind here. And okay, what are we going to do next? And so what's next is the actions of the meeting will be written up and will be distributed. There will be further meetings in the new year in Edinburgh, in Aberdeen, in Glasgow again, and we will go all around the country if need be, just to get more and more people on board. Now, we invited several people from some of the other groups, some of the groups you'll know, like the unionist clubs, for example. Now, only I think one guy from there was able to turn up, but in time there will be further representation from those good people, because they're very much on our side also. So we spoke well into the night, and it was very encouraging, really, because everyone was of the same opinion, which is we can't go on like this. Something has to change. We can't go on with Scotland not being governed, because it's quite simply not being governed right now, certainly in Holyrood at a devolved level. There is nothing going on there. It's just a series of meaningless discussions about when another referendum might be held. It was discussed last week in the meeting on what was it? Was it Wednesday night or Thursday? I forget which night it was. Anyway, the clear vision we have is there is no path to a second referendum in Scotland. There isn't one. They're not going to get one. Therefore, there's no path to independence. We're already seeing excuses in the tame pro-nationalist, pro-SNP media in Scotland, saying things like, oh, well, of course, with this new Omicron, it's possible that it might be 2025 before we have a referendum, because let's not forget, at the recent SNP conference, they reinforced their promise to hold a referendum in 2023, and there's no chance. They're not going to hold a referendum in 2023. Absolutely not a chance. So already they're making these, if you like, handy excuses. Oh, we could do, of course, guys, but COVID, you know, and it's that kind of nonsense that they keep talking here. So we're going to spend the coming weeks emphasising this type of behaviour, this type of skullduggery in nationalist circles, because they're clearly lying to the people of Scotland. They're hoodwinking them. They're taking them up the hill like the Grand Old Duke of York, only to bring them back down again. And every year it's the same thing. Oh, I promise you this year. It's never going to happen. So what we're trying to do is impress upon people who are maybe not political by nature that what you've got to do is get on board with a movement which is aimed at consolidating the pro-UK anti-nationalist majority in Scotland, because we know there is a majority. We know that even the numbers in the elections bear this out, because you never get more than 50% of the population voting for pro-nationalist parties. You don't even get 50% of the people who vote voting for pro-nationalist parties, so there clearly isn't a majority at all. The majority is our side, and that is what we're impressing on people. So there'll be more in coming podcasts on here. I'll tell you more about this as it continues, but we really feel like we have a head of steam now. We've got some very, very clever people, very able people, people who have had huge experience of businesses and how to start campaigns and how to successfully run campaigns. And so we're kind of thrilled about what's happening. One interesting postscript, if you like, from the meeting, it was in a bar, it was in the function room of a bar in Glasgow. And of course, you can't hold a meeting like this in public, because you'll get nutty nationalists coming along and just trying to ruin it for you. That's what happens. We know that they have this reputation for being cyber bullies and all this sort of stuff. So you can't have it in public. You have to have it private. So we held it in a private function room in a bar, and there were some bar staff there, young guys, yeah, obviously like students or just young people working in a bar. And one of them I noticed was listening very intently to all that we said, John. And I at the end of the formal portion of the meeting, I went to the bar and said to him, "Would you mind me asking? I know you've been listening in a little bit. What did you think?" And he said, it was a guy from Shetland. The Shetland is a place in Scotland which is very, very anti-nationalist. Both Shetland and Orkney, the same. They would never go along with a breakaway from the UK. It just wouldn't happen. Other areas in Scotland, the same. South Scotland's the same. Probably East Lothian over Edinburgh Way is the same. There are very few places that would happily go a breakaway, but these places in particular, Orkney and Shetland. And he said to me, "I am not political by nature. I would get involved, but I can't interfere in my studies, and I don't want to become a target." And this is what we hear more and more. We hear more and more that people are of a mind not to go along with nationalism, but they've got other priorities, and of course they don't want to put their heads above the parapet for fear of maybe falling out with the governing people. And this is the unfortunate thing in Scotland right now. There is a reluctance to speak out because you feel that you will be blackballed, or you will be left out of opportunities. You will be denied opportunities to do just what you're trying to do to make a living. And so that's the unfortunate side of this. But you've got to remember that the SNP is all powerful right now, but that cannot go on. Every political career ends in failure, as we know. Every political party eventually loses out, and we know what's going to happen with these guys. And what we need to do is just keep on doing what we're doing, highlighting the hypocrisy, the audacity, if you like, of these people, because they do lie. They lie to the people of Scotland regularly, the SNP. They regularly tell the lie. Their senior MPs and MSPs do this, regularly propagate the lie that Scotland subsidises England and that the UK just wants to keep Scotland because it's a cash cow. Now, anybody who can count to 10 knows that that's a complete fallacy. It's complete rubbish. But this is what senior SNP figures say. If you speak out against them, if you speak out in, say, the sphere of education or health or business, you are in trouble because people will make your life miserable. I spoke about it in previous podcasts about boycotts, which have been encouraged by MPs and MSPs, boycotts of Scottish businesses. And it's just frankly unbelievable. When did you ever hear of a business, a ruling government saying to a business, we're going to boycott you because we don't like the way that you state your political opinions? It's appalling. So this is what we've done. The long answer to your question is, to summarise, we had a really good first meeting. We'll be meeting more and more. We'll be growing in size. We'll be growing in, if you like, the scope of what we're trying to do. There will be further roadshows. There'll be further interaction with the guys like the unionist clubs. And we will certainly be reaching out further to other communities in Scotland, such as, I think I mentioned last week, we've made great inroads with the Asian community in Scotland, because the Asian community, as I've said before, is extraordinarily well assimilated in Scotland, far more so and far more adroitly than in London, for example. And these people don't. The last thing they want is to Scotland to be independent. Same with Jewish groups, same with anybody, the Family Party, those guys, anybody. It's clear that we've got to keep the momentum going, and we've got to build, if you like, an alliance of our own to confront and to fight the nationalist separatist alliance, because it is an alliance. It's an alliance of very disparate views with one aim only, one aim linking them all, that is, and that's the breakup of the United Kingdom. And it's very important to keep framing it in those terms. What these people seek is the breakup of the country. And we have to see it in those terms because it is nothing other than sedition, really. It's appalling, John. It really is appalling. They genuinely are trying to break the country apart. They would happily see the partition of Scotland just to get their way. And so we've said, no, we're not allowing that. So the fight will go on. And I was very, very encouraged by just the sheer the passion on show last week. So very, very encouraging, John. It went very well.
Good. And David, I mean, one thing there you said that there's no credible opposition to these people, and yet in the last general election, now correct me if I'm wrong, wasn't there 10 Conservatives that got the seats in Holyrood?
In the total, I'll give you the total number. I'll check the total number for you. Yeah. In the election, remember in Holyrood, it's almost like two elections. You have 59 what are called constituency seats, which is when you the traditional first past the post. You vote for a guy in a constituency. If he wins, he wins. If the others don't win, their votes are lost. So of those 59 seats, from memory, I think the Conservatives won. I know that the Lib Dems won 4. I think Conservatives won, was it 5 and Labour 3, something like that. I think it was 11 in total that those guys won. So not huge, but of course those parties, the main parties, get the bulk of their seats. They rely on what's called the list, which is where you get. Hang on, I've got this finger slightly right. 73 seats, 73 constituency seats, and 56 list seats. That's what it is. Sorry, 8 regions, 7 people in each region, 56. So in the list, in the regions, as they call it, they call it either the regional list, really, which is the secondary votes. That's where the Conservative and Labour and Lib Dems traditionally get most of their seats. Not so much the Lib Dems. The Lib Dem vote is pretty much concentrated in individual constituencies, where you do see, incidentally, John, quite an element of tactical voting. So you get a far higher proportion of people voting Lib Dem in places like, again, Orkney and Shetland, where Willie Rennie's seat is, which is Mid Scotland, Fife, somewhere over that way, and the Alex Cole-Hamilton is now the party leader. So you see a lot of people voting for these guys in their constituencies, but very few people vote for Lib Dem in the regional list. So that proves the fact that you are seeing tactical voting in the constituencies. With the Conservatives and Labour, they have their traditional seats, some of which they still win. Labour win very, very few constituency seats because really the Labour vote has gone almost entirely to the SNP. So they win very few of the constituency seats. And the Conservatives traditionally win seats in places like South Scotland, like Eastwood in Glasgow, and like round Aberdeen, where it's quite affluent. That's traditionally where they do very well. But the SNP won, I forget that I don't have access to my PC at the moment, or I'd look it up. It won something like 62 out of 73 seats. I think that's correct. And in the constituencies. And so as a result of that, because you're handicapped, if you win a lot of seats in the Scottish elections in the constituency vote, you're handicapped, penalised, if you like, in the secondary vote. So the SNP, although they took about 1 million votes in each first and second votes, the bulk of their seats come from most of their seats comes from the constituencies, whereas with the other parties it's the opposite. Most of their seats come in the secondary list, and so that's the frustration, if you like. It means that you've got the main parties who are still fighting this, particularly the Labour Party, are still fighting this, red against blue nonsense that you saw for decades. They still think that the Labour Party is stuck in that mindset. They think that if they target the Tories, they'll get lots of votes. It doesn't happen, because you can't just ignore the fact that the SNP is going to get 45% of the vote pretty much across the board, and that's what happens. And then that leaves you with Labour and Conservative fighting it out again with the Lib Dems for the missing 55%. But of course, 55 divided by 3 is always going to be a lot lower than 45. So they're wasting their time. So I think I've given you the statistic before. In the constituencies in Scotland, 1,170,000 votes went to losing pro-UK, that's Labour, Liberal Democrat and Conservative candidates. 1,170,000 votes were cast. Those votes might as well have been torn up and used as confetti because they were useless. Now, in the secondary ballots, you get votes almost on a PR basis, not quite proportional representation basis, almost but not quite. But most of the seats won by the main pro-UK parties came from the secondary vote. But even with that, 64 seats in total went to the SNP. There are 129 seats in Parliament, so 64 is slightly less than 50% of 129. But of course, they are now bolstered by the 8 Green MSPs, all of whom again won their seats in the secondary list. So it's not very confusing, this, but it's quite hard to grasp. So consequently, 72 out of the 129 seats in total in Holyrood are occupied as of now by the SNP or their bag carriers, the Greens. So we are in a minority in terms of the number of seats held, albeit the number of votes cast, we had the majority of the votes. So that's the massive, enormous frustration for people like me who are looking at the majority of votes being cast, but the majority of seats being lost. And so that's where we are. So, yeah, so the Conservatives they've done okay in terms of, they got the same number of seats this time as they did 4 or 5 years ago, 24, I think, in total. No, that's fine. But the SNP have got 64. So the Conservative Party is never going to win an election in Scotland against the SNP unless there is widespread, massive, unprecedented levels of tactical voting. Now, there are lots of people in Scotland to this day who will never vote Conservative because their fathers did and their grandfathers did vote Labour, and they still have this thing about Thatcher closing down communities and all that stuff. Okay, I get all that. But you look at what the SNP are doing right now. They've now sounded the death knell for the Scottish coal industry, because they've said we're not going to have any more extraction of fossil fuels and burning of fossil fuels. It's got to stop. And when it's pointed out to them, until 4 years ago, their entire budget was based on the premise that Scotland would go on extracting oil from the North Sea. Then the SNP's answer to that is, oh yes, well, we've got to follow the science. As if the science didn't tell them 4 years ago that, burning oil was polluting. It's just ludicrous. And now, just this week, the SNP finance minister has produced her budget. And her budget now says, yeah, well, we're cutting council grants or whatever it is, the money that goes to councils, but of course they can levy whatever they like by way of council tax. Council tax. Now that doesn't sound too unreasonable, except when you remember that when the SNP came to power in 2007, they said we undertake to scrap unfair council tax. Now they're saying to councils, charge what the hell you like. I mean, that's what the SNP is like. They will lift their skirts and pander to anybody, any passing fancy in order to get their way. They just literally, John, they literally make it up as they go along. It's appalling, absolutely appalling. Hold on a sec, my colleague has just sent me a message. Hold on a sec, sorry, I'm not being rude here. This is a guy who's hoping to join me tonight. Hold on a sec. 1 second. Hang on. Oh, sorry about this. No, he's not going to be able to join us. So he's going to be stuck with you and me tonight, John. Never mind. Sorry about that, John. Sorry.
No, you're okay. You're okay, David. Not to worry.
So it's that time of year. It was just before I came on. I got the message. From my colleague saying he'd be a little late. Now he said, "I'm really, really sorry. He's stuck in a council meeting or something, so can't be helped. Sorry about that, everybody. So you're stuck with John and me for now. So sorry to put upon your to impinge on your time, John. But yeah. So yeah. So that yeah.
Okay. So
okay, cool.
David, again on that, again, I was mixing my vote winning up by it was the general election, I think it was.
Oh, right, the general election, right? Okay, the general election. Yeah, the Conservative Party have done better in the general election in Scotland. That's for certain. But I use that term loosely, really. I think from memory, haven't the SNP got 48 seats in Scotland, and the Labour's got 1. Conservatives have got, I forget, but 10 or something like that. So yeah. You could say that the Conservative Party are the second or fourth in Scotland. Yeah, that's true. You probably could. But what you've got in terms of the Conservatives in Scotland these days, you've got this situation where Douglas Ross took over as the party leader in Scotland earlier this year or last year. I forget. It was in the lead up to the election. Interestingly, the leadership of the Scottish Conservatives had changed hands 3 times. So you had Ruth Davidson took over. She then stepped down when Boris Johnson became Prime Minister because they are politically diametrically opposed. Jackson Carlaw took over. Jackson Carlaw didn't really cut the mustard. Ruth Davidson took over again shortly before the election to Holyrood, and then she stood down. She's now in the House of Lords, and Douglas Ross has taken over. Douglas Ross is also an MP at the moment, so he's still an MP in Westminster, and he's also been voted into Holyrood since May. Now, he is a little bit less opposed to Boris Johnson than Ruth Davidson, but he wants to be his own man. So he is, if you like, distancing himself on various issues from Boris Johnson. So at the weekend, he had this farcical situation in Scotland. Just to set the scene, you have Scottish political shows, as you will have in Northern Ireland, I'm sure, and you get the BBC Scotland guy will interview a senior person from the SNP, and the questions will always be quite gentle and not too tough and taxing. Then a Conservative will come on, and bear in mind, this is a guy who's a Conservative MSP, and he's being asked questions about Boris Johnson, and it's nothing to do with him. Really, it's nothing to do with him at all. And this guy, Douglas Ross, his name was asked, okay, what about Boris Johnson? Do you think that if this party was held last year, this nonsense I'm trying to pin on Boris Johnson right now about this party they held in Downing Street last year, do you think he should resign? He said, oh yeah, I think if he misled Parliament, he should resign. This is the Conservative Party leader in Scotland. You're saying, oh yeah, absolutely, I'd back that, What? So in Scotland, you get this feeling that the main opposition parties are trying to attract what we call soft nationalists, people who maybe aren't particularly extreme nationalists, but who want to express some, if you like, identity of being Scottish. And the only way they've got to do that right now, it seems, is by voting SNP. So the main parties are targeting them, as they call them, soft nats, and say, okay, we can get these guys. They might vote SNP, but they're not really for independence. And it seems all of the impetus in Scotland right now on behalf of the main pro-UK parties is to try and appear reasonable and to try and appear not in line with Westminster too much, and certainly not in line with Johnson, who's not popular at all in Scotland. He's not a popular figure in the least. And a lot of people feel that his continued presence as Prime Minister strengthens the case for a second referendum, because he's just seen as a buffoon really in Scotland. He's just seen as someone who's very remote and not really very interested. So while the Conservatives, yes, they are probably the second force in Scotland right now, the Liberal Democrats will never be the second force in Scotland. That will never happen. Because, I mean, they've still got this hangover of Nick Clegg and his going back on his pledge to scrap tuition fees. Then when he got into the coalition government, he agreed, he voted to treble tuition fees. So they'll never get over that, not for a generation. Labour, as we know, as we've said, John, the bulk of the electorate who formerly voted Labour are now voting SNP. You can see it because the numbers are almost identical, and it's practically the same people across the board. I mean, it's a really, really strange phenomenon. The numbers have just reversed. Right up until the 2010 general election, the Labour Party in Scotland was winning 40 out of the 59 seats. You've now got, and the SNP was winning 2 or 3. You've now got the SNP winning over 40 seats and Labour win 1. It's literally, as one has gone down, the other's gone up. Quite incredible. I've never seen a phenomenon like this in UK politics in years. So the Conservatives, they're in the main seen as the main party of opposition. So if I can talk demographics for a second, because I think that's quite important for this show, in the main, and I'm saying just fundamentally, but not exclusively, if you're, say, from a Protestant background in Scotland, and if you're from any kind of unionist background in terms of being pro Northern Ireland, and if you see you've got any affinity with Northern Ireland, fundamentally those votes will go to the Conservative Party. Few people these days from that demographic, Protestant, they say the PUL, the Protestant Unionist and Loyalist community, will vote Labour, because Labour, ever since the devolution took place and ever since the Scottish Parliament was reconvened in 1999, Labour was seen as being very hostile to that demographic, and so that's part of the reason why they lost votes and they lost seats, because they were seen as being no friends of the unionist community. And that's why in 2007 there was almost, not quite, but almost welcoming of the SNP winning the election for the first time, albeit a minority. So that's what happened. So it really is, it's very interesting times in Scotland, because you've got people who in the past, we know that in the main the Labour vote in previous years was made up primarily of working class people from both communities, if you like to take it that way, but primarily the Catholic vote, if you like to put it that way, because remember 18% of the population in Scotland is Roman Catholic. Those people primarily would vote Labour. Those same people are now in the same numbers primarily voting SNP. That, if you like, is at least in part what's caused the emergence of the SNP and the decline of the Labour Party. The Conservative Party has plodded along. They made some gains, lost some, got some back again. But remember, until 1955, the Conservative Party was winning elections in Scotland as much as getting most seats. That hasn't happened, though, since 1955. And that's what, 66 years. 66 years since the Conservative Party was the largest party in Scotland. And it's not going to happen again anytime soon. So more and more, coming to a long way around to the answer here, but more and more, the sentiment we're hearing right here, John, is we're disenfranchised. We don't have anyone to vote for. They're all the same as each other. I look at Boris Johnson. I look at all the guys in Westminster in the Conservative Party. They don't represent me. I look at the guys in Holyrood. That's just a talking shop. They can't do anything. It's all just Nicola Sturgeon. All I hear about is independence. Nobody's taken her to task. I would vote, but who am I going to vote for? And that's one of the reasons why we did what we did back in May. But it's a very big ask to get a new party to get significant inroads in an election, particularly if there are divisive figures. As you know, one of the figures in our party was quite divisive, George. But that's just the way it is. People in Scotland have very ingrained voting habits, and they tend to vote the same way for a long time. So the SNP has been the biggest party, certainly since 2011. And now, of course, they're consolidating their position. They've got this agreement with the Greens. And we do face a very tough time in Scotland, because I keep saying this, the SNP itself is an alliance of these hard left guys who used to vote Labour but don't anymore since the Second Iraq War, the very idealistic young people, certainly the Catholic vote. A lot of the Muslim vote goes to the SNP also, and the woke vote, if you like, these absurd people who believe that trans rights trump everything else in the country. That's the alliance that makes up the SNP. You add the Greens to that, and you've got quite a significant chunk of the electorate all voting one way, all seeking one thing, and that one thing is the breakup of the country. Now, against that, you've got these three main parties, very much like you've got in Northern Ireland, who insist on fighting against each other. And you just think, guys, this is insane. How is this ever going to change? Because we know the numbers aren't there. Labour could win an election in Scotland. There's not a chance. Not a chance. Lib Dems are, they still think they're fighting the Brexit campaign, to go back into Europe, so they're an irrelevance. And the only other party is the Conservatives. And as I've said, the Conservatives have so much baggage still and have so long a track record of failure, electoral failure in Scotland, they're not going to win anytime soon either. So the only possible way forward is to get such momentum going through organisations and campaigns like we're trying with the majority to get these people to work together properly, or a new force has to emerge. Otherwise, you're going to get the same result in the local elections next May. You'll get the same result in the Westminster election, the next Westminster election. And I'm here, well, until recently, I was hearing a lot of talk that there might be a Westminster election next year. I doubt if that's going to happen now that the opinion polls look the way they do. But no matter when it is, because it takes so much time for electoral swings to take place, there's no way the SNP are going to lose the next election either, unless something completely unforeseen happens. So we really are up against it here. So somehow we've got to, as a movement and as a community and as an electorate, we have to either persuade the main parties to do what they clearly don't want to do, and that is work together sensibly, practically, or there's going to have to be a new force. And at the moment, we're not sure what it's going to be, but we know that we just have to be a movement which is irresistible. We have to be able to go to parties and say, we have this many members, that constitutes this many votes. Unless you do what we insist that you do, we won't vote for you, and try and frighten them into doing it. It's got to be that way we do it, John, because they're just not getting the message otherwise. At the moment, we're just stumbling from one SNP fiasco and one shambles of legislation to the next. There's nothing. They're mired in scandal. They're, on a personal level, you've got SNP MPs or MSPs who are bullying staff. You've got the appalling case for the previous finance minister was sex pesting a schoolboy, a 16-year-old schoolboy, in his place of work. None of these things affect the SNP. You had their ex-leader up on 14 charges, including several of attempted rape. That didn't put anybody off voting for them. What's it going to take? I really don't know. I really don't know. What on earth is it going to take for the people of Scotland to take a tumble to themselves, as we used to say, and realise that the appalling level of governance, stewardship, the appalling quality of stewardship of these people. But no matter what happens, people keep voting for them. And the only reason that can be is because there isn't a practical, viable alternative. It has to be that. It's the same as the joke they used to see. You probably heard this way back in the day. In Scotland, you could put a monkey with a rosette, a red rosette on, and standing in a Labour in a constituency, and he would win, because they would just vote for anybody. And that's what it's like with the SNP. And obviously, I just have to caveat that the term monkey is being used to refer to a primate, not to refer to anything, racial or anything, just in case anybody chooses to misconstrue my words. But literally, that's what it used to be like. So that's where we are now again. We've got the most appalling quality of political campaigners and political bodies in Scotland, yet the ruling body is almost untouchable. And it's incredible that after 14 years of an SNP administration, they're going from strength to strength. That has to be because of the paucity of opposition. It has to be. There can be no other way for it. It has to be that. Because it's certainly not because the SNP are good at their job, because they're anything but. So frustrating times, but we've just got to take it one step at a time. The council elections next year, we've got no great aspirations of doing anything there to stop the SNP and the Greens. But we have to be ready for the next general election and the next Holyrood election. That's got to be the target, because otherwise this is just going to go on and on and on and on and on. And the really baffling thing, though, John, if you don't mind me saying, is there is. It's not as if they're working towards anything. The SNP, they're just dangling these carrots of, oh no, don't worry, yeah, we'll have a referendum next year. Oh, I know we said last year, but it'll be next year. Maybe the year after. Oh, maybe 2 years. It's just complete nonsense. Nobody believes this. So a lot of people, a lot of influential bloggers who are pro-nationalist are now saying there isn't an independence campaign in Scotland. There's just an independence industry, and it's just keeping all these people and all their advisors in a job. That's all it is. So I'm not having any part of this because there's no road to it. So a few of them see that, but the bulk of the people, the bulk of the electorate don't. And so there's those people we have to target. We have to do something about it before it's too late. So we've got to persuade our politicians, our pro-UK politicians, to get real and to understand that this has got to stop. Otherwise, Scotland is going to go on with an appalling record in education, a truly scandalous record in health, in policing, in transport. We know that care for the elderly is non-existent in Scotland. They were practically sacrificed at the start of the COVID campaign when people with COVID were put into nursing homes and infected the old people, and they died as a result. And that actually happened. People should be up on a charge for that. That's what's happening. And unless we stop these people, that kind of stuff's going to continue to happen because, as you know, when you're in power, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And right now, these people think they can do absolutely, literally anything. And they are doing so. So I'm painting a bleak picture, I know, but I'm only doing that to stress the importance of what it is we're doing here. We have got to get these people to start seeing the reality of what's going on in Scotland. We've got to. And that means stopping people voting for these absolute incompetent imbeciles who are lying to the people of Scotland and mistreating the people of Scotland in a way that I've never seen before in all my many years on this planet. So yeah, sorry, I know I'm not ranting a bit tonight, John, but this is how we feel in Scotland. Just immense frustration. That's how we feel.
Yeah. And David, I mean, listening to you there's one thing that we've identified in terms of, is that you said earlier on about the young lad that was in the meeting last Wednesday, the barman, and he was saying, well, I would like to support you, but I can't. And, we've had people on our Restore channel in the past from Scotland and the university, and they were saying that unless that they sort of complied and they pretended that they believed what the left-wing educator was actually pushing down the line, unless that they appeared to be listening and on their side, well, they might have got marked in a different way. And this is the sorts of things that are happening right today. So, whenever you identify that is actually the problem, and let's just give this a title, it's cancel culture. And unless that we can stop this cancel culture from occurring, what chance do we have? So where do we start, David? Where do we start to stop that cancel culture, if you don't mind me asking?
I think you're absolutely right. I think there's a number of things we have to do, and this is one thing that I've said on the in these meetings. And I have meetings with, the Unions Club guys. I have discussions with them every day. I have discussions with these guys every day. I do it. I occasionally get involved in another podcast on a Thursday night now. And the point I make at this is always this, the same sort of thread, if you like. Not one thing is going to change this, John. Not one thing will change it, but various strands of activity will change this. Now, what I mean by that is we have got to make it more publicly known that this cancel culture exists. We've got to publicise it more. So we've got to get influential people calling it out and saying this is wrong. We know that you look at so many of the major figures in this country right now who are being subjected to cancel culture. J.K. Rowling, for one, who said absolutely nothing wrong other than it is important that you respect the fact that women are biologically different from men, and she's got all this complete nonsense of trans activists calling her a TERF. This appalling saying TERF, trans exclusionary radical feminist, which is the phrase they throw at everybody. It's like the modern equivalent of a racist. That anybody who says anything that goes against this woke culture, this cancel culture, is racist. Now you're a TERF as well. Absolute hogwash, complete lies, complete nonsense. But all we can do is try and identify that this is happening and try and publicise that it's happening. I've spoken to you, I think, in the past about a journalist stroke author who has written a book about this. And this is something I've been trying for weeks to get this lady to agree to let me interview, and I'd love to have her to let her interview me, I should say. Let me interview her and play it on this platform, John, because I know you guys would like it. The journalist's name is Julie Burchill. She's very famous. She was a music journalist for years. She then became the enfant terrible of Fleet Street, very hard-hitting opinion writer. She's written a book called Welcome to the Woke Trials, I think it's called, and it talks about the stuff that she's been through ever since, if you like, cancel culture came about, which I think is back in 2014. It's a fascinating book. Now, she's bringing to the attention of people the fact that these issues are happening every day, and it's only through the efforts of people like Julie who have platforms from which they can speak that we're going to get this done. We have to somehow get on board, recruit people who have got a high profile to say, look, this is what's happening. This cannot possibly be right. In the introduction to her book, she talks about it wasn't so much that it was every day she was seeing some evidence of cancel culture, but it was every hour. So she was saying, I would go to bed reeling from the knowledge that rambling is in fact racist, only to wake up to find out that brunch is evidence of white privilege. And these are things that people have actually said to her and meant. You know, brunch shows evidence of white privilege. How do you work that out? What don't people of colour eat brunch then? I mean, it's just utter nonsense. I mean, this is just it's been taken to such extreme levels that soon you won't be able to say anything. It's like we used to joke about California in the 70s when everyone was so right on, but now it's permeated into every facet of life. So Julie Burchill was fired from the Telegraph this year. She was a leader writer with the Telegraph this year, and she made a joke when Meghan Markle's second child was born. She said, whatever it was called, I forget what they called it. She said, oh, what a pity. They lost the opportunity to call the baby Georgina Floydina. And she was fired for racism for saying that. Now, it's not a particularly tasteful joke. You know, if you make any joke about somebody's race, like Danny Baker did when their first baby was born, he made a joke about it. He lost his job at the BBC as well. But the point is, you genuinely cannot say a thing now. So to get round this, the only thing I can suggest we do is take back the initiative and start to push back against all this by saying, enough. We won't have a situation where people are being almost sent to Coventry because they make a joke or because they have a belief in, or they say they have an opposition to, for example, trans women boxers who are knocking 7 colours out. Oh, hang on, one sec. Sorry, hang on, guys. Sorry. Out of biological women. I mean, how already going to be very badly injured if that stuff goes on. So we've just got to do it. We've got to get to a stage where we're pushing back and saying, right, we've got all these people on our side. These situations are simply not sustainable. We can't go on like this. It's got to stop, and we're not going to take this anymore. And it's going to take a lot of bravery because there really is the cancel culture is so dominant now that you have to be extraordinarily brave to speak out. And I think it's going to take yet more bravery and yet more yet more campaigning just to get back to any kind of equilibrium with these guys, because at the moment, really, you've got a hair on the tail wagging the dog. That's how ridiculous it is, because you have people who are so underrepresented. They represent such small sectors of the community, but these are the guys who are telling us what we can and can't do, and it's got to stop. It simply has to stop. And the idea that people are being told, you know, people in business, I mentioned this the other week, the Unions Club guys, we were talking about having an open letter to Boris Johnson, and we were going to go to various businesses to say, okay, would you like to sign this? And it was all just saying, okay, we want you to commit to Britain, commit to levelling up, and stop the threat of the country being broken up. And the answer was unanimous from the first 2 or 3 people we spoke to, and that was, we'd love to totally back you, but we can't, because we can't possibly take the opportunity or risk losing opportunities of having tenders for work accepted. So to me, what I'd be looking for there, John, is for one of these guys to say, you know what, I'm not taking this anymore. So I'd be looking for a little bit of courage to say, yes, I know that I'm running the risk of maybe losing out on the chance of getting some work here, but we've got to look longer term. We can't go on pandering to people just on the basis of whatever the next fad is that they choose that they want to look the part of. And that's what's happening right now. It's not because it's the right thing to do. It's because these people are scared of looking like they're swimming against the tide. They're looking like they are being too outspoken. Bravery, only bravery, changes the tide of history. And right now we're in such a bad place. We really are. We're in a situation where you've got the government of Scotland is practically non-existent as they chase this complete fool's errand of seeking independence. It's never going to happen. So Scotland is at a standstill right now. And while it's at a standstill, while more money is being squandered on constitutional matters which are not devolved to Scotland, more money is being squandered on foreign embassies from Scotland. In Scotland shouldn't have any foreign embassies. Money is being squandered on these things, and it's being starved of other things instead. So it will only change when people say, okay, this is as far as we're prepared to go. And that's what we'll be looking for. I'll be looking for people to take a lead and to stand and be counted. And, this all sounds a little bit maybe militaristic or whatever, but I think it's the only way to do it, really. I can't see any other way. You're not going to get these people changing their minds. They're not going to voluntarily give up their position of power. The SNP will happily go along with any passing fad, however ludicrous. Really. When we were at it was a rally outside Hollywood one day, and it's for women who said, we are women, we will not be told to be quiet. Women won't wish was the name of it. And you had a handful of Conservative MSPs came out and said, yeah, we back you. And inside, when Murdo Fraser, I think it was giving a speech to Holyrood, he said, outside, I noticed that no SNP members joined the campaign to speak out for women's rights. Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister, was sitting nearby shouting, shame on you, shame on you. And he turned around and said, what, shame on me? There are 2,000 women outside. Are you telling me they should all be ashamed of themselves because they want to stand up for the rights of women? And most of these women were in same-sex relationships. The huge majority of them had, rainbow flags. They were, LGBT. And you've got the First Minister of Scotland is saying, shame on you for listening to these people who are seeking rights for women. When did rights for women become verboten? I mean, it's crazy, John. It's absolutely crazy. If you woke up from a sleep 10 years ago to see that the Progressive Party in Scotland is saying, no, we can't have women's rights because that's trans exclusionary. What? So to me, it can't go on. It's going to take people who have got genuine courage saying, right, enough. Okay, who's with us? This stops now. That's how it's going to happen. And that's why I'm saying it's going to take a number of strands. It's going to take somebody like Julie Burchill, who's got a big public profile. People like Neil Oliver, who's terrific at this, confronting these people. People like Andrew Neil's very good at this. GB News has shown great promise. Maybe they'll help. I don't know. I prefer it if they called themselves UK News. I've got to say, I don't really like the term GB News. Just in the same way that I hate this idea of Team GB in the Olympics. It's not Team GB at all. GB's one island, guys. It's not GB. I know that it's colloquially used to mean, the United Kingdom, Britain, but it's not GB. GB is just one landmass. So, that, but I'm splitting hairs a little bit there, but I'm sure you share my frustration with that. So that's what it's going to take, in short, John. Courage. Stand up and say, I'm not doing this any longer. Call me whatever the hell you like. I don't care. But I am not going to put up with this any longer. And they can't cancel all of us. They just can't do that. They can't. So that's what I'm looking for. A lead to be taken by senior people, influential people in business, in politics, in the arts, in the media, to say, no, enough. This is not San Francisco in the late 1960s where we're all burning bras and all this nonsense. This is the UK in 2021, in the aftermath of a pandemic. This is not the time to be jumping through, to be inventing our own hoops to jump through to make everyone's lives impossible. We can't have this anymore, and we're not going to have it. So that's what I'd be looking for. Bravery, and people who've got the bravery, like this platform, for example, to stand up and say no more, absolutely no more. That's what it's going to take, I think.
And David, just one more question from me, I guess, before that we close. But
Yep.
do you think that there's an element of, let's say, that conservative thinkers from within the Holyrood, do you think that there's an element of those people probably keeping themselves, their one eye on the, let's say, the new vote that is coming up in terms of the children that has been through the universities and believe different things than like what people believed all those years ago? Is there an element of trying to appear to be like outday the SNP, or they're out SNP in the SNP in order to try to win votes? Is there an element of that, perhaps?
I think perhaps in the Labour Party there is. I think certainly in the Green Party. I mean, the Green Party's, we know what they're like. They're absolute fanatics up here. We know that. I mean, remember, this is the Scottish Greens, who are not affiliated with the UK Green Party, but they're pro-nationalist anyway. But in the other parties, yeah, I think there's a possibility. I'm told that Anas Sarwar, who's the leader of the Scottish Labour Party, is playing the long game, and that he might appear to be soft on nationalism a bit, and he might appear to be maybe pushing back against Tories more than would be wise at a time when we're looking for them to work together. But I don't know. I think there's a possibility. I think they're trying to. I think the Labour Party, especially, are trying to maybe steal that ground from the SNP. Yeah, but you get a lot of people in the Conservative Party also these days who are quite who like to appear as being progressive. I can't really see that this Conservative Party will get anywhere doing that. That's the sort of profile that would suit the Labour Party, I think, a lot better than the Conservative Party. What I am seeing the Conservative Party, as I mentioned earlier, is you do see them trying to distance themselves from the UK Conservative Party and that's not all that new a thing. I remember Murdo Fraser is one of the most prominent Conservative MSPs. He's an openly pro-Rangers, openly a Rangers supporter, which is very, very unusual in politics in Scotland. You know, I can't tell you how unusual that is. There are only two or three I can think of. You know, the one that we always think of is Gregory Campbell, who's who's obviously in Northern Ireland, but very unusual in Scotland. When he stood for election to be the leader of the Scottish Conservative Party, actually said, no, we should break away from London. We should be our own party. And it was thought of as so outrageous that he wasn't voted in, although he was the favourite, and Ruth Davidson got the job. So there have been some movements in the part of the Conservative Party, maybe to look at things a little bit differently. But I do take your point, and I think you're right. I do recognise elements of that, particularly in the Labour Party, because I've listened to a lot of the questions that have been asked of the SNP, and a lot of the Labour people are asking questions very much like that. So unfortunately, you'll see Labour MSPs asking questions like, First Minister, would you agree with me that it's dreadful that we are seeing evidence of anti-Catholic marches and anti-Irish racism when they're talking about orange walks? You know, you get that in Scotland. Labour MSPs asking those questions. You think, hold on a sec. Where does this come from? You know, so we are seeing that. So yeah, I'm told, my spies tell me, the people I know within the main parties tell me, yeah, just Anas is being smart here. Okay, well, we need to see some end results. So if that's really what they are doing, I mean, to me, that's like a race to the bottom, John. Let's see who can stand for the most outrageous policies possible, because that way we might get some young votes. Well, God, I hope not, because there are an awful lot more old voters than younger voters. So, and young voters don't tend to be all that interested in politics. But that's one thing the SNP has done very well, and the Green Party do quite well also, is they get young people voting for them. So the Green Party, their vote went up quite substantially in May. And, you know, we were hoping we could make inroads against them. Didn't happen. So, you know, it's easy. It's quite, for those guys, for the young people, I should say, yes, it's the Greens and the SNP that they vote for in the main. You won't get young people voting Conservative unless they've got very strong family ties, or very, very strong, say, business ties, or maybe they're from our community, as I mentioned before. But it's not really reflected in the numbers. So, you know, the Conservatives are getting maybe 20% of the vote, and the SNP's getting high 40s. So every way you spin it, John, it's going to take a coalition. It's going to take an amalgamation of effort, and it's going to take people working together. You're not going to see the Labour Party, whatever platforms they choose to stand on, you're not going to see them overtaking the SNP anytime soon. Certainly not in any of the next election at the end of this Parliament. Westminster Parliament or this Holyrood Parliament won't have it. They're too far behind. It would be inconceivable. And frankly, they don't have enough policies anyway. So it's going to be very difficult. And that's why we have got to keep pushing for these people. Whatever they see as their way of clawing back some percentage points in votes, it's only when you stop people voting SNP that these people are going to lose elections. It's as simple as that. Labour and Conservative fighting each other like two bald men fighting over a comb, that's not going to work. Honestly, they're just fighting to pick up the scraps while the SNP stroll to 50% of the vote. It's not going to be good enough. And we have to make it clear to those people it's not good enough. And it would be the same in your place, if you had the DUP and the UUP and now the new guys as well, saying, oh yeah, well, we want to be in opposition to Sinn Féin. That's what it's like. It's like, if you imagine the three main unionist parties in Belfast all fighting to win second place to Sinn Féin, that's what we've got in Scotland right now. It's an exact, that would be the mirror image of what we actually are seeing in Scotland right now. And it's just crazy. So yeah, I think there's a great element of truth in what you're saying there. There is certainly, I'm seeing evidence of some of the main parties starting to, if you like, steal the SNP's policy. I'll give you a classic one. Monica Leonard, who stood for leadership of the Scottish Labour Party, she was the one who pushed this idea of free sanitary products for women before the last election. And the SNP said, no, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. And there was such an outcry because for one time, the Labour Party had managed to steal a progressive idea that the SNP were forced to say, God, yeah, there's some good publicity attached to this. Tell you what, yeah, let's vote for it. And so they did. So that's an example. It's not exactly what you're asking, but it's very, very similar. So all that happens with that, of course, is the SNP vote for it, and it looks like they've implemented the legislation because they're the ruling party. So it's on every level they're outsmarting the opposition in Scotland, and it's going to take an awful lot more than just some clever ideas and some clever policies and some plagiarising policies to beat them. It's going to take an awful lot more than that, and I'm not sure it's going to happen anytime soon unless there's some real radical thinking, unless they really are encouraged and, if you like, forced to act differently from the way they're acting. And when I say that, I mean the main parties. They've got to start doing things differently. They've got to start working smarter, because otherwise we're in for potentially decades more of this nonsense. And the danger is, what's going to happen to Scotland in that if that happens? Because you've got drug deaths are the highest in Europe, quite literally. It's shameful. We've got education falling further and further every year. There are going to be more and more people leaving Scotland, which is going to mean less tax revenue, more public spending, greater deficit. On and on and on it goes. It's just ridiculous. So poor outlook just now. But it has to change. And that's why people like us are doing what we're doing, John. We're standing up and saying, right, what's it going to take? And we're having fresh ideas all the time, more people joining us all the time. We're taking views from young people also, just to say, what is it you think we should do? Tell me what you think would be good. Tell me what you think you would like to see. And we are getting some really good traction now. And that's just going to grow and grow. So hopefully I'll have more to tell you. And huge apologies for tonight, Alan, being unable to make it. But I guess it's Christmas and there are a lot of demands on people's time. But we'll have a first class guest for you next week if we hold something next week, John, I promise.
So to summarise, what we've just learned there live from Scotland is that the Labour Party, well, they were the people that allowed for these devolved assemblies. And by doing so, what they did was they give rise to the SNP. We've just learned again from David that really and truly these people understand that there's not going to be another referendum anytime soon with reference Scottish independence. I mean, and that is an absolute fact. And then we have the Conservative Party, and I can remember writing an article some 4, maybe 5 years ago, and I called it the corporate straw that would break the Conservative Party. And what I meant by that was that the Conservatives, they have Americanized in terms of their politics and how that it is that they implement their politics. And when you look at corporatism, say, for example, some of the big conglomerates, I'll not mention names, but some of those big food chains and food shops that are running around, well, what they actually do is that they try to attract more and more and more footfall. And they do that in a way that what they try to be is they try to be all things to everyone. and some would say they eventually become nothing to none, because what they do is they seek to put more profits in the hands of those that would invest into those type of companies. So what we have now is that we do have the Conservative Party, and if you look right around the United Kingdom in terms of conservatism, David, what you'll find is you'll find those that claim to represent people, those that claim to be conservative in their thought processes. Well, what they've actually done is they've joined the other team to score goals against that which they claim to represent. So it was a very interesting night whenever we learned that direct from Scotland. David, thanks very much yet again for coming along. And I'm just going to say to the live chat that we've only got 2 more weeks here. I was just looking at the calendar, and did you know that we've got this week and we've got next week, and then Santa comes to everyone. So hopefully next week we'll arrange between now and then, and what we'll do is we'll fill this screen with people that we've talked to across the year. And, we'll all put our Christmas jumpers on and our Christmas hat, and we'll put a little Christmas background. And what we'll do is we'll have a wee chat about what the year, what do? You reflect on the year that has been seen and almost gone, and you look forward into the new year, anticipating what next for Restore, what next for Restore Scotland, what next for the conglomerate that David's going to be setting up. And well, we'll renew our vigour in 2022. David, thanks very much once again for coming along. And
Anytime. My great pleasure. Always, John. My great pleasure. Apologies that our guest couldn't join us tonight. He was very apologetic, but we will make it up to you. And now, to do something Christmassy next week would be great. So count me in for that. That would be fantastic. I really like that, John.
Good man. And listen, you're allowed to have your little glass of red wine, because I know
great. Fantastic. That's very kind of you. Great stuff. Thanks, John.
No problem. David, we'll see you soon, and we'll see the live chat very, very soon. See everyone tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. Playing us out from Scotland.
Thanks, guys. All the very best to everybody.
There are any number of issues in Scotland that need addressing. Health, education, drug deaths, the economy, but all of those are taking a back seat at this conference to one issue above all else. And that's an independence referendum.
Scotland doesn't want a Boris Johnson government. It doesn't want to leave the European Union, and it wants to be able to determine its own future, whatever that future turns out to be. And this idea that the Tories can just say no and sort of imprison Scotland in a union against its will, I just don't think will hold.
Independence is what the SNP is all about, and Nicola Sturgeon is expected to reinforce that massively at this conference. There will be no chance for people who are against the First Minister's policies to get a hearing.
Just across the Irish Sea stirs a heart of loyalty, raising honor and dignity, drives a will to keep us British free. Not alone are we on this journey, for in a land just across the sea is a hand that reaches out of friendship, and a bond that's lasted centuries. And as hands cross the water, reaching out for you and me, for Queen Ulster and for Scotland, help to keep our loyal people free. Let the cry be no surrender, let no one doubt our loyalty, reaching out to the brave red hand of Ulster is the hand across the sea. heaven, help to keep our loyal people free. Let the cry be no surrender, let no one doubt our loyalty. Reaching out to the brave red hand of Ulster is a hand across the sea. Just across the Irish Sea stirs a heart of loyalty, raising honor and dignity. Drive the will to keep us British free, not alone, only on this journey, or in a land just across the sea. It's a hand that reaches out in friendship, it's the hand across the sea, it's the hand across the sea.